Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Component Connection. I will be your host for this episode. My name is Abby Langenberg. I am the Director of Business Development for SBCA, and welcome back to part 2 of our conversation on the quiet risks in component manufacturing. We are picking up with the risks tied to over-reliance on key people and how digital QC can help protect continuity and decision-making. So let's jump right back in. So let's shift gears over to one of the things that I think is probably more common than we would like to believe that it is, which is that over-reliance on your key people in a manufacturing setting. So when you are relying on one person and you're like, you know what, Jerry's on this shift, we've got this. What happens when Jerry's not there? So how do you capture critical knowledge so operations don't depend on a single individual?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll pick on Jerry for a little while here, but that's the mark of a great component manufacturing operation is if you don't want to just plug and play and insert and take people out for no reason, but it's a status of life. You know, you're going to have people that are going to be sick or they want to take a vacation or they're going to move on, or heaven forbid they are hurt and they got to be out for a few days or weeks or whatever. So you need to be able to build a team that's, and I always look at it as learn the position left and right of you and ahead and behind you in case you're called to do something that way. And that's kind of what I look at for training in a lot of cases, especially with component manufacturing, because you have so many different roles on the plant floor and even in the office, in the shop, there's a lot that goes on there. So really just developing good standard practices, and SBCA can help with that. And when you first brought up this question, I thought of a recent example that it was I went into a hardware store over the weekend, and it's a national known brand, and they're typically locally owned, and some will be regional and whatnot. But it was very early Sunday morning. I was there when they opened, and I needed to get a cooler for a few different reasons. But so I go in and get the cooler, and the guy ahead of me was trying to return a vacuum. Well, the guy at the counter was well over his head, and he called the manager, who was supposed to be the manager. And turns out, he didn't have the accesses to the 3 or 4 different systems that he needed to be able to do that. And that's a great example of, Jerry, when he's there Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, handles those things. But, when Jerry's sleeping in on Sunday morning, or maybe he's going up to the ski hill or, taking a break or going hunting or something, that's when things tend to break down. And that's where having those things documented in the standard operating procedures and, where those things are great to be able to know, well, okay, if Jerry or Jerry's brother, maybe it's his son, maybe it's Jeffrey. Jeffrey is going to be the manager on duty for Sunday mornings. We need to make sure that he has all these 12 accesses so he can do what is a routine example or routine, return for a vacuum that somebody no longer needed. Now, to bring that back to SBCA and how we can help at that is, we're not going to be able to do every operation for 1,300 truss manufacturing operations, but what we can do is we can bring people from those operations together and they can talk about it and say, hey, what do you do for this? What do you do for that? And that's where engaging in SBCA at OQMs, at BCMC, anything that we have online with our webinars, that's a great way to get to know other component manufacturers. And that's worth the price of admission right there, and being like, hey, what do you do? And, if you have a decent relationship and you approach it, kind of a, little bit of humility, they're most likely going to share it with you. Now, I'm not going to promise that for anything, but I've seen that more often than not, to where a lot of people, they're willing to help other manufacturers that they're never going to compete with. So, ask those questions. Say like, gosh, these are the 3 things that, that's a good, for anybody that's going to travel to BCMC or an OQM or any of our events, have like 3 or 4 things like, man, these are just stuck in my craw. Like, how can I fix these? And hopefully you've talked to somebody, you come across, or you talk to enough people and ask them about it, that they'll find something or give you a recommendation, or maybe they'll spark an idea. And if nothing else, it kind of acts as counseling. Like, gosh, I'm not the only one that has this problem too. And that's kind of where SBCA can come in longer term. We try to be pragmatic to where if we have similar conversations with a number of component manufacturers, that's where we'll try to, understand, okay, this is a problem. Are we able to, can we? And, what would a solution to this look like? And that's kind of where the association come in and be helpful.
So when we're looking at this knowledge repository, inspections, checklists, corrections as you go through, how can digital QC help with kind of capturing some of that critical knowledge, maybe from your one star player that you have on every shift?
I think it's about setting an expectation and being able to show measurement. And, if you the old adage, if you measure it, it's going to improve, and you can compare. And, how do you compare it to, like, say you've been using digital QC for 5 years now? How do you compare it against last year and the year before? And, are you getting better? Are you not? And there's variables in there, but how do you minimize those variables to where you get good information and you can track it? And it's not all about the people. I mean, it could be machinery. You might have a press that's, needs to be retooled or needs to be dialed in, or you might have something else that, a saw, you have more gaps or it's not cutting just right and stuff like that. So I think it's a great measurement tool, but the creativity is going to be in the operator and probably in the manager and how they look at that data and how they're able to call it and ask for it and to know, to be able to provide the information, and that's being curious about your operation. Like, why is this way? And, that's where data can help with it. It's not going to solve everything, but it can help provide insights to those that are curious.
So as we're looking at, measuring all of those different situations, measuring all of those different categories, comparing to yourself is great. But what about the standards that we're comparing to? And how are those standards designed to help your operation instead of limiting your operation?
Yeah. So, the standard that comes to mind for our industry is going to be TPI 1. It's the ANSI design standard for metal plate connected wood trusses. And I think a lot of people overlook that document and the importance of it. But that is the rule book for how trusses are to be made, not should be. Like, that is shall language, and that it's adopted by the code. It's one of those to where, when you get into being a truss manufacturer, you need a few things. You need some plates, you need some lumber, you need some machinery. The more that you can spend, probably the better on, creating the trusses efficiently. But there's nobody out there that's going to tell you, like, hey, no, you got to do it by this book. This is the book. And typically learn that the hard way. I mean, I remember back, it's been several years ago, I had the call from a component manufacturer, and he wanted to know what all this QC mumbo jumbo was about. And I said, well, okay, well, this is what you should be. And he goes, oh, well, I need a letter of good standing that says that I can, deliver these 64-foot trusses that I have built. And the building inspector in this town is asking for that. And I go, well, you kind of put the cart before the horse here, and explained why and went through that. But that's one of those that, anybody that's in the component manufacturing field should know certain things. And that's one of them. Another example I had from just more recently, thought that TPM 1, the most recent version, was 1995, 30 years old at this point, and didn't understand that it had been updated and that there was changes being made. And this is, an operator that, I would have anticipated him knowing a little bit more, but that's a good example, another example. And that's what kind of has me a little fearful, that people don't fully understand that, yes, this is the rule book. And, to make it easier for component manufacturers, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I'm so far behind, there's a couple chapters. It's not like it's going to be hard for you to understand. And you're going to get the first one where it's, just defining those terms. And then it's a lot of, the roles and responsibilities on, component manufacturers, truss, technicians are asked to do a lot of things. This helps set some guidelines and kind of the rules on who should be doing what. Now, you can exceed your scope if you want to, but knowingly know that you're doing it, as opposed to just kind of negligently falling into it. And then beyond that, the quality criteria, and that dictates how many inspections you're supposed to do, having a manual, what needs to be in the manual, how to do the inspections. It provides recommendations. The commentary is a great document. So, I mean, if you do not have ANSI TPI 1, the 2022 version at your location and the commentary book, I would go look up our fine folks over at TPI and get one ordered. You may be able to do it on our website as well. But either way, get to know that document. Just, that's the most basic. Yes, you have to. It's not good practice type thing, and that's essentially the law when it comes to building trusses. And we need to be a little bit more knowledgeable along those lines. And, the triangles are still probably going to come out the door, very similar, but you at least know where your responsibility starts and stops and that you're doing it the right way. Because, that's another thing. And I'll segue into another part. Whenever something does go wrong, one of the things that's going to get called into question, and it's, I've never been to law school, but I'm guessing on the first day they teach you to ask about the quality control. And whenever there's something like, what are the prior records? Can you demonstrate that you were doing, an adequate job? And it doesn't mean that you have to be 100%, but it does have to show that you are able to catch it. You're able to show that you pass a majority of your inspections. And if you don't, how do you correct them? Because that's the worst part. Like an inspection, that doesn't happen, for however long, and product goes out the door, that's the first error. But then if you catch it and you don't do anything about it, that's another problem. But, you catch it, you do something about it, that's a gold star. And then, hey, you pass your inspection to begin with, that's the double gold star.
So I think you touched on it a little bit here, but how do those industry standards, maybe paired with digital QC, help reduce risk without slowing down operations? Because I think a lot of the misconceptions around using QC or doing the quality assurance inspections is that it's going to slow down operations, and we don't want it to interrupt our flow of how we're doing business every day.
Yeah. So TPM 1 stipulates that for every line that you have operating at your location, you're going to do 3 inspections per shift per 40 hours. So depending on how many lines and how many shifts you're running, that can be a lot of inspections. And that was one of the primary drivers of digital QC, is how do we get this to where we speed up the process or we make it more efficient? Not just because we want to get through it and get over with, but how do we do measure the same stuff with the same quality, but, more efficiently? And that's where the digitization of that paper vellum form was kind of the original goal. And we were able to complete that. We captured the imagery. We're able to type things in faster, in which you can go out there. And, the nice thing about the tablet that you use, it's probably not going to blow around like the wind. Now, there have been some windstorms here recently that may have been able to do that. But it's one of those to where, we early on in the digital QC era, we were doing measurement tests of the inspection, and it would go from like 25 or 30 minutes per truss down to like 7 or 8. And I don't, that has been such a good tool or selling point to that program that for nothing else, just to make it more efficient. And there are 2 assumptions, when we were talking about that, like, will the person that is committing all that time previously just do more inspections with all that extra time that they now have because they're more efficient, or will they be able to go on and do other things? And that's really comes from management, and both are possible. If you want more inspections, there's plenty of locations that do more than they exceed that requirement. If you want to go to what the TPM 1 minimum is, that's fine. And you want to use that person for something else in your location, great. But it is one of those that much more efficient to where you have the ability to, to do what you need to do, but not that it's going to take all day. And that's kind of to another point that I'll reiterate. I hear from some manufacturers, usually the general managers, they're like, oh yeah, we don't have time to spend for an hour for an auditor to come in and, do an audit for 1 hour once every quarter. I'm like, you don't have 4 hours a year to, provide to your quality. I mean, I understand being busy, but I mean, how many of the hours could it save by improving your quality just a fraction of a percent, and that's really what we're looking to do. So there's some things in there that, people will come up with reasoning. It's probably not, what they tell you isn't their real reason. They just don't want to be bothered by it. But, if you're not going to be bothered by quality, it's going to bother you at some point. And that's not a good road to go down.
Yeah. Can you give us an example where following the standards and using digital QC together prevented a mistake?
Nobody talks about the near misses. I mean, every truss that goes out there that's successfully installed is that's a success story. And that, again, how do you sell an accident not happening? And that's where we get into, it's tough, but that's where just being able to do it and having it to begin with is the primary goal. And, imagine going down a road to where you don't have a QA process like that first one. You you didn't have the QA auditor, you didn't have the quality management system in place, you didn't have a manual, and you ship 64-foot long trusses, or even if they're 45, that they're not long span. Now what happens? Now you've got a building inspector that's saying, hey, you can't do this. You can't use those trusses because they're not approved for this. And, you probably could go through the steps and figure it out, but you're going to have a difficult time demonstrating that. Now, let's say you fall out of practice with your established methods, and now a building inspector is asking for your letter of good standing, and you don't have it because you blew off your last 2 audits, and the auditing agency puts you in non-conformance or whatever that exact language is. But that's where a lot of this is, if you want to save time, don't put plates on half the truss. And what do you think is going to happen? That's the same type of idiocy that a lot of not a lot, but I mean, there are manufacturers out there, and those are the ones that we want to do better. We don't want, our industry to be known as that. So that's where kind of the frustration comes in from my perspective. Is like, this isn't a want to, this is a got to type situation when it comes to abiding by TPI 1. And, there's other ways to compete on quality outside of just doing the basic, TPI 1 aspects.
Yeah, I think as we start to close out our episode, some things that I kind of like to give our listeners as maybe a reflection point is, where are you accepting inconsistencies because it's always been that way? And where are you relying on people instead of processes? Are you able to say, yeah, we have a digital QC program that's able to help us mitigate these hidden risks. We have a digital QA. We have a QA program that's going to help us ensure that our quality is correct every time. We have job site packages that are going to help close that communication loop and ensure that everybody has the same information to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can. I think that, the strongest operations aren't the ones that never have issues. They're the ones that are built to absorb the issues. Digital QC and job site packages are helping our members do that exactly, of being able to find those risks before they get to the field.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, is making sure that, nothing is perfect. And, especially through repetition, you'll find things happen. But it's how do you react to it? How do you adapt? And, how do you look to improve for future use? I mean, there's all kinds of different things there, but hopefully they're able to take a little bit of a pause and listen. This might be a 2-part podcast, but it is one of those that just look to be a little bit better. How do you make improvements? And, don't get overwhelmed. Just start taking action towards doing some of these things. Our staff is here to help, whether it's SBCA or SBCRI. We want to help you establish that quality program. We want to help you get it, a little bit better. We want to make sure that you're in compliance with your local jurisdictions, the building code, and TPI 1. And that's, such a big part of what we're trying to do with our, quality boot camps, through just our commitment to quality, digital QCs included in member dues. It's, we're not trying to make quality a profit center for the association. We're trying to make it a standard that everybody abides to. And that's going to better the overall entirety of the industry to where trusses are the preferred method for floor and roof framing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us today and for listening to SBCA's podcast, Component Connection. If you enjoyed this episode, found it valuable, please like and share it with others, and stay up to date and in the know by subscribing to Component Connection on whatever podcast platform you use. And we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.